Ian Furness, 93.3 KJR, our good friend up north. Ian, good morning. How we doing?
Gentlemen, how are you?
We're doing okay. The Dirt Man is out today. He had to cancel. He wasn't even a questionable scratch. It was a healthy scratch. His son, unfortunately, got sick, so he had to cancel very last minute this morning. I know. He's Teddy ball game. I know.
Bummer.
I
know.
We've all gone through it as parents. I want to dive in with a lot of that's going on up there, but I told Swag earlier that I would allow him to start with a Kraken question. Now, you are Mr. Hockey in Seattle. Right. We don't have as much of that hockey down here, and so Swag is now a Kraken fan, a former Canuck fan. He has a hockey question for you, Ian.
Fire away, Swag.
What is the difficulty there with getting the first goal? Why are the starts so slow for this Kraken squad in the last month?
Oh, man, I don't know. It's been bad. I think it's 5 of the last 6, and overall, like 70% of the games this season. You should, and by the way, Sprague, you should be a fan. Our games are on down there. You should be watching your friend. You should be watching your friend Ian on the pregame and postgame intermission show. Come on, buddy, on the Kraken Hockey Network. I'm disappointed in you, but yeah, it's been an Achilles heel all year, and the first goal doesn't always dictate as much as some think in hockey in the NHL, but a slow start and playing, chasing every game is becoming a really, really hard thing. It's one thing if you've got Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl or Nathan McKinnon and like some of the hammers in this league, but they are not a high-scoring team. They're a team that scores by committee, and I think it's one of the big issues that this team's had this year, and it's why they're sitting on the outside looking into the playoff race right now. They're really good defensively. Their goaltending's been elite. They just can't score, and their starts are slow. And I guess you look at the coaching staff and leaders inside that room.
There we go. Ian Furness with a hockey update because Swag is itching for some Kraken talk. No, I'm surprised you don't do a podcast on the Kraken.
In all of my free time? Yeah.
I mean, you find your free time and talk a little hockey if you want. Let's do that hockey. Ian, Ryan Grubb fired yesterday by the Seahawks. I don't know how surprising that was to Seahawk fan. Felt like something they kind of wanted. Where were you at? How shocked were you that Ryan Grubb one and done?
Probably closer to surprised than stunned. I think the offense just wasn't that much better than it was a year ago under Shane Waldron. And, there's a variety of reasons. Everyone points to the offensive line, and rightfully so. But I think it was a philosophy thing. We're going to hear today from Mike McDonald. He has a news conference at 1:00, and I'm sure they're just going to say, hey, we never could get aligned in what we wanted to do philosophically between the head coach, who's a defensive-minded guy, and the offensive coordinator. Their run percentage versus pass percentage. I mean, their run percentage was, I think, 28th in the NFL. If you go through some of the basic numbers, just the basics, not the ones that they probably really deep dive into, but, like yards per game, rushing yards per game, passing yards per game, all those things, they're strikingly similar for the most part as they were last year, and they were looking for improvement. And then, I think that the numbers that jump out are red zone offense, bottom third of the league, and goal-to-goal offense, first and goal from wherever. They were 28th, and that's just not good enough. And if you look back, and that's why they lost games. There's too many times when they couldn't punch the ball in. Again, you can point to the offensive line, but I don't know how much – listen, the offensive line was an issue last year. That's a front office issue. That's a John Schneider issue. But I think at the end of the day, this is a team that they won 10 games. But if they were – if this was college football, I'll use this analogy. If this was college football, even though they won 10 games, they did so with a group of 5 schedule. Like, they wouldn't have been invited to the dance. Like, Cincinnati would have been in, right? Like, if you're going to say, okay, let's take the best 14 teams, best 7 and best 7, Cincinnati would have been in. I don't think Seattle would have been. They didn't beat anybody this season. The defense was so much better that there's no reason that this team should not have been a playoff team based on a slight improvement from the offense, and they didn't get that. But I think it just comes down to Grubb and McDonald probably just didn't jive. And McDonald, he was the last coach hired in the cycle, Brendan, and I think because of that, they were kind of at and a first-time head coach too, so there's no coaching tree for McDonald. John Schneider hired Ryan Grubb. There's no doubt about that. and it just didn't work. In fact, I'll tell you this: an NFL source told me yesterday that I trust when I was doing it more on a daily basis before the Kraken stuff. I checked with a guy yesterday, and he said that they almost fired him during the bye week.
Wow.
So that's how bad it was. Yeah. Well, they almost fired him during the bye week, and then they decided at the end of the year to move on, and here we are.
Yeah, no longer getting beers at a local Seattle tavern. I remember there was a moment during the Jet game where they were at the goal line and there was a turnover or there was a play they didn't execute. Maybe it was a 4th and goal, and you could see Mike McDonald say, "What are we doing here?" And I that was like the first red flag of like, "Ooh, things aren't going so well." I want to ask you, because I want to also ask you a Coug question. We're talking with Ian Furness, 93.3 KJR here on the Daily Ticker. You know, McDonald took the defense up a level. There is no doubt about that. I think Seahawks fans were excited about that part of it. Now, what they do offensively next year or how they change it, it's fascinating to me. This isn't a Mike McDonald thing. At what point is it John Schneider? And maybe that's already been the thing for you and many others up there, but it kind of has felt like he's, for lack of a better term, coasted off of the Super Bowl of drafting a bunch of late-round guys. Hey, we did it with late-round guys. How is it? What is the John Schneider thoughts up north? And you talk about the offensive line woes, the Ryan Grubb hire. They had that the starting linebacker they just outright released at one point. How much of the John Schneider hot seat should be warm to scorching hot?
It should be, but I don't think it is. And no, that has been a big topic of discussion up here. There's no doubt. We've talked about that quite a bit. Listen, what he did between 2010 and 2013 was remarkable in terms of building this roster. And they hit on a bunch of guys, there's probably minimum 2 Pro Bowlers, maybe 3 Pro Bowl or Hall of Famers, I should say, that they drafted during that span of time. It was crazy. I mean, really remarkable. But let's use the offensive line for a second. I think this is the indictment on John Schneider. Since 2010, when he took the job, no NFL team has spent more draft capital based on, the charts that they use. Every draft pick's worth a certain number of points, all that thing, no matter whose chart you use. Nobody has spent more draft capital, but if you just go in terms of pure draft picks, Seattle's number 3 in the NFL since 2010 in drafting offensive linemen. But draft capital in terms of guys drafted higher, they're number 1. In that time, guys, they have had one offensive lineman that they've drafted since 2010. Russell Okung in 2012 is the only one that's even made a Pro Bowl appearance. One Pro Bowl appearance. And frankly, everyone makes a Pro Bowl appearance these days. So that's a massive indictment. They have missed so bad on the offensive line despite investing draft capital. And I think that's where his issues start. This year they drafted Christian Haynes in the 3rd round. You draft a guy in the 3rd round in the NFL, especially in the offensive line, he is expected to start. He's not good enough to play. Now, maybe he will be next year, not even close to being ready to play. We kind of thought Scott Huff, the offensive line coach, was in trouble because of that, not so much Ryan Grubb. And then you mentioned the linebackers, both starting linebackers. Dodson, they made the decision to move on from Bobby Wagner and Jordan Brooks, and instead they get Baker and Dodson. They had to cut both those guys. McDonald thought neither one could play. The one thing we do applaud with, I don't know if it's something with Schneider. I think it's inherent in the organization. I think it started with Paul Allen, and now it's with Jody and Burt Cold. And I know those are 4-letter words in your town, but I think, for this team, the one thing they do is if they make a mistake or if things aren't working, and honestly, we always bring this up, the Kraken are the same way. They're paying a coach that hadn't even got an extension yet in Dave Haxall. The Kraken and the Seahawks are the same. If things aren't working, they don't care. They'll just fire you and they'll start again and they'll pay the money. They're the opposite of, we have a Major League we have a borderline Major League Baseball team up here, and they don't spend money. These two organizations have no problem at all, like going out, like just saying, okay, it didn't work, let's move on. And I think as a fan, you have to applaud that because too many teams just say, oh, we'll see what happens. No, and if Grubb wasn't working, linebackers weren't working, whatever, they go out and make a move. But they've got a big offseason. Like they have a big offseason coming up because, I just kind of crushed them in terms of their 10 wins, but they're not rebuilding. And we've had this conversation, right? A lot of times, this is not an organization that thinks about rebuilding. So how do you get from 10 wins to a playoff team or a division title? That's the next question.
Fascinating you say that about the ownership group of the Seahawks, because I think Blazer fan would say quite literally the opposite, given that we just have Chauncey Billups hanging out for no reason. Everybody knows he's going to be gone. It's a lame duck year, and they just refuse to buy him out of his last year of the contract and say, bye-bye, we're going to move on from it. So it's fascinating how they're operating the football team versus the basketball team down here, which has really struggled. I didn't have enough time to get a Kook question in. We'll get you back on at some point for a Kook question. I want to ask very quickly as we get you out, is Geno the quarterback of the team next year?
I think he is, because there's no other option. I think they'll have to do something contract-wise, in terms of just what they'll do to revamp it, or what they'll, like his cap hit next year is $44 million. He's set to make 31 or something like that. I think they'll redo it. I think they'll extend him for 2 years. Front-loaded heavy. And he'll be back next year. Listen, man, there ain't nobody in the draft. Mm-hmm. And you guys saw what Sam Darnold looked like on Sunday. Like, I'll take Geno over that disaster any day. But they need to find an offensive coordinator that can make him, better in the red zone and make better decisions. And he'll be back next year. That would be stunning if he's not the quarterback next year. I'll leave it at that.
There we go. Good stuff. Ian Furness, 93.3 KJR, pregame, halftime, postgame, Kraken TV down here and up in Seattle as well. Legendary broadcaster, formerly of The Fan, and a good friend of the show. Ian, thanks so much for waking up early and hanging out with us. We appreciate the update on Ryan Grubb and the Seahawks, and we'll catch up with you probably more in the offseason, talk a little Cougs.
Anytime you guys want. Oh, by the way, Swag, how'd you like that, Go Cougs, when they came in there at Child Center and just smacked you guys in the face, huh? How'd you like that?
We're going to Pullman next week, so we'll our young freshmen will learn from that, and your boy Ethan Chase isn't going to get loose.
Ethan Price, but that's all right. Don't worry about it. You're only calling the games. Don't worry about the nets.
I'm focused on the Dons right now. We need a win.
You better be, because their backcourt scored like 90 against us, even though we
still Malik Thomas is an issue.
Ian, I feel like you got a Clark Griswold. Bend over and I'll show you when they get to Pullman next week.
All right. See you, boys.
There we go. Ian Furness, 93.3 KJR. The Daily Ticker brought to you on the fan by our great friends, Pelican Brewing Company. Now offering signature West Coast IPA on a shelf. Raise your glass, drink on. Pelican Brewing, born at the beach.